Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, an episode with Rich Klein. I want to thank my sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, Compsy.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. Here's the discussion between Rich and myself.
Welcome, Rich. We wanted to talk about hobby history books. You raised that, and we both have a library of hobby history books, and even Mike Kramer's book recently, Jeremy Lee is coming out, not necessarily vintage history, but it's a more modern history of what's going on with his pops and comps.
I know there's another guy doing a book that's coming out very shortly.
And another couple of guys coming out that might be way more vintage. At any rate, it's a worthy goal, and it's a great contribution to our hobby, to our industry, to have nice and accurate books about the hobby, not exposés or anything, but they just lay out the history. I'm trying to do that in a very non-linear way with my podcast, and there are other podcasts that do delve into some hobby history and stuff like that. Putting it all together in a book, at least our age, a lot of people like to read a book, start at the beginning and work your way to the present. Is that what you had in mind?
Yeah, it's interesting that it's becoming a growing topic again. But I want to also point out when we're talking about this is Pete Williams' Card Sharks.
Yeah.
The first half of the book is actually a hobby history book.
He's a serious journalist.
Remember, when he was at USA Today, I used to talk to Pete all the time.
Yeah. He's got skill. He has passion. And he loves baseball. He loves cards.
And I believe he's a triathlete, too.
What are the next steps? It's been suggested that I would put together my podcast, maybe not every single one of them, but organize them in a way that could be with a ghostwriter, because I don't think I'd have the patience to patchwork everything together and put it in chapters or linear order. But there's a lot of history in there. I am struck by the fact that some of the history comes in the form of tributes that you and I have done to fallen comrades, guys, and a few women too, who've been in the hobby and made great contributions, and memorializing them after they're passed. It'd be better to talk to them while they're still alive. It causes me to think, who are the hobby veterans I need to be interviewing? Because I don't think they're going to write the book, but I think I can talk them into being on the podcast, even if it's a phone call instead of a Zoom, if they're not that technologically savvy. Are you thinking that way?
I think you have even better contacts than I do on that. I think that's definitely worth doing. There's ways at the National, especially with people like John B.A., who have the first two tables, just to take 20 minutes just to chat.
I've got B.A., John Ramirez, Pat Quinn. Those I've said I'm going to definitely get them in this year.
Yes.
On podcast. Whether I do it in the spring when it gets closer to the National, I'm not sure, but they are national mainstays in the highest order.
That's a great pre-national thing with people who have been there and done that. Those are three really solid choices. Between the three of them, they are over 120 nationals combined, maybe even 130 combined.
I think they're all perfect.
I know John and BA have been to just about everyone. And I think Pat's been just to about everyone too.
In partnership with Steinbach and some of his other affiliations, Sport Collector Store. That sounds good.
We look at people. As I said, I follow Herb Ross on Facebook. He's probably approachable because he was one of the first people with Donnie LaFleur in the 70s.
I spent the night at his house one time.
Okay.
50 years ago, I think. But anyway, great former policeman or detective, whatever he was.
Bill Jacobowitz is still around, who was along with Tommy, the co-promoter of the Montclair State Show. Pat Ganella is still around.
Okay. One of my famous buys was from Pat.
Pat came up with so much stuff over the years.
Yeah.
And he had a funny rule in that he didn't like during the peak of the hobby in the 80s. This is not really the peak of the hobby, but for us, it was the peak of the hobby. He would hold everything for 5 years before he sold anything.
I was the beneficiary.
Okay.
Of one of his things he sold because he just held it for long enough. And I was just there, and he said, would you be interested? And it was like a vending case of high numbers. And I said, yes, just give me a price. He gave me a price. I said, here it is. And it wasn't a full vending case, but it was a number of 800 count boxes.
Joe Esposito, he's an 80s guy, but Joe Esposito's still around. He's one of the last of Rosen's crew to still be really active in the hobby. And he stayed on good relations with Al the whole time.
Yeah. He had his niche. That's the thing. He had such a well-defined niche. Okay. So this hobby book, I understand we're referencing Pete Williams. He had his journalistic style. Is this a coffee table book or is it a history book? If it's a history book, is it organized chronologically or is there one big chapter for the Nationals, one big chapter for the rise of card shops and other regional card shows, and breaking is a chapter?
As we're walking through this, I like the idea of the chapters, the card shows through the years, card stores through the years. Card stores are very different now than they were even 20 years ago.
Every decade, there's been advancements. I'm just wondering if you do it by decade or pre-war and golden age or whatever, all these.
I don't think there's a linear pattern. I think that's why I like the idea of topics, and then card shows, card stores, the internet, how the internet. I remember, I don't think I still have it. I think I gave it to Jason when he came. I had Jason go through some of the stuff in our sunroom, and I said, Jason, take whatever you want. I'm not even going to charge you. He spent about an hour and a half, and he walked away with, I think, a suitcase full of stuff. And I said, wonderful. Yeah, I had in January 1996 SCD in that stack. What I remember about that is how few of the people advertising had even email at that time.
Right.
Not even internet stuff, email. Within 2 years, almost every ad had email at the very least, and most of them had websites too. And so how the internet has evolved, how eBay is certainly most important. eBay deserves a chapter by itself.
But I'm totally with you. SCD should have a chapter all to itself. That was a phenomenon. Trader Speaks. It just depends on how you'd want to set this up. But SCD is a wonderful story of how that grew and grew in size and frequency. And it was the place for buying cards mail order.
It was 400 pages a week.
Of the big pages.
Big pages. They're still doing SCD. It's much smaller now, but during its peak, it was 400 pages a week from like 89 to 93 or whatever. When I was in my apartment, I will tell you, there were times it got really stuffed into my mailbox.
I was reading it cover to cover when I was doing price guides, not to bid on things, but just to see what was being offered, what was available.
I would leave stuff at your door. Do you want to buy this? Usually the $5, $10
the type cards. We had to have the type card. We didn't have to, but I think that was a wise decision.
Yeah, once the internet came, a lot of the expensive type cards, we were just able to say, oh, here's a picture. When I worked out deals with most of the auction houses, I'll tell you what, let me just steal whatever I need to steal from you image-wise, and we'll give you a half page or a quarter page ad. I think Master wanted a full page. Fine, Bill, get a full page. But that was how we got so many images of the really old, expensive cars, is we just used with permission. I always stress with permission, with a trade. We wanted to be above board in how we got those images. And actually, auctions. The big auctions are a story and is a chapter in itself. Brian has gone to take an REA to a place where even Rob Lipson didn't. Rob Lipson had the one big catalog a year, and it was amazing. One of the funniest stories is when I got laid off from Beckett one day, Rob actually called me on the phone. He says, don't worry, I'm going to keep sending you the catalogs, because I know he wanted me to stay informed.
You're a lifer, Rich.
I'm a lifer.
Okay, so let's say a publisher contacts me and says, we want you to write the definitive history of the hobby. And before they even tell me how much money they're going to offer me, I'm saying, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm retired. And the reason I would not do it is because I like finding out new things. In other words, not rehash, but it's basically assembling all the known information and putting it into a book. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in learning new things. I want to have a new experience. And I'm not sure you're exactly the same as me, but if I reject their advances to write this book, because to me, it's a living book, because just like some of the things we did, is that every year we're expanding old knowledge as well as new knowledge. But the next thing I'm going to say is contact Rich. Are you interested in doing something like this?
I've toyed with the idea. I don't think I have the patience to write a book. However, I don't think you should say no. I think you come back to them with a counter. You have younger relatives that are very tech savvy.
Yeah.
You've done 1,300 podcasts. It could be 1,400. You've done a lot. Your mission to one of your tech savvy young friends, you offer them a fun project. It's not really a super expensive project.
Well, but Rich, we're talking about not just doing an almanac. We're talking about the history of sports card. Where I'm coming from and you're coming from is that we have a tendency to be encyclopedic. And I'm not sure that's what the hobby wants.
Here's where I'm going. Get one of your young ones to go through your podcasts and delineate where to put it, like box reviews. When you do the box reviews, that's not going to be something going to be in the book. And then go and say,
except there are some nuggets in those box review. There are some sports card insights that generalize to more than just the product that's being discussed.
So somebody can listen to all your podcasts. I've listened to all your podcasts over the year. There's only one I ever missed, and we've talked about that. The publisher can pay for someone to put your podcasts into sections and get a co-writer. You don't have to write anything. You've done it as an oral history, which is what I always wanted to do.
Let's pivot a little bit here because I like what you're saying. And in another couple of years, AI will be able to do that instead of one of my young friends. And it will be for free. It'll synthesize everything that's in there. So let's pivot away from doing it now to say, if something like that was going to be done in 2 years, where are the gaps in the hobby history that I ought to be addressing, or you ought to be addressing, or we ought to be discussing for the hobby? What are the stories that have not been told, or the insights or the explanations of what was going on? I think it's pretty sparse for pre-war of what I've talked about, and even collecting in the 50s. But I got experience there collecting in the 70s for the national hobby. Because it's not a book about neighborhood flipping games. That book's been written. But you see what I'm saying? Maybe there's some gaps, some things I need to be pursuing so that if I wanted to turn over these podcasts to somebody or something, there would be coverage of the key people in the industry, the key events in the industry, and things like that. So what am I missing?
The 80s.
You think I'm missing the 80s?
I think you're missing the 80s. Because you were so busy creating Beckett in those days. It started as just you. Then it went to you and Claire. Then it went to you, Claire, and Pepper. Then it went from you, Claire, and Pepper to a few more people. I was like employee number 50, I think. In 89, B.A. Murray is the first true hobby person. And I don't think you've covered enough about the 80s and what it was like with the explosive growth of Beckett in the 80s. You were riding a wave. And I think just some even reflection on what was it like? You were traveling. I would see you many times a year in New York because you were also very judicious. Hey, if I'm going to go visit Random House or a publisher, let me make sure I schedule it for the weekend of Gogoria Rothstein show where there's 400 vendor tables and, oh yeah, and I can take the train from New York to White Plains. I don't even have to drive there.
Who wants to rent a car in New York?
Yeah, but you were very judicious in how you went up. And that was something Pepper always said too.
Yeah.
If we can replicate what we do, then that's a win. Why create brand new things on a monthly basis when we can have a good system already set up? Why reinvent the wheel? But in a sense, in the 80s, you were inventing the wheel. You had to try to figure out the rookie card dilemma. Yeah, I think you've talked about that.
You're shocking me to say that if you look at all the podcasts I've done, I've shortchanged my own decade.
You shortcase your own decade.
Because maybe it's too obvious to me because I lived it. And maybe it's
right, because you were the one doing it. I don't get there till 1990. I started writing, I think, in 87.
Yeah.
I don't get there till 90.
The good news is those people are still alive.
Yes. You've never had Claire on.
Didn't I have her on one time? Maybe
you may have had her on one time. I don't remember her being on.
Okay. She ought to be in the book.
She has to be in the book.
She's in the podcast, but maybe she ought to be able to speak for herself.
You've had Pepper on.
Yeah. This shouldn't be a book of the history of Beckett publications.
No, but that's a very important part of the 80s. And it's not a history of Beckett publications, but Beckett chronicled the 80s as well as anybody. Because
you don't think I've done that?
What you started with was basically some readers' right questions and a price guide in the middle. Football began at the end of 89. 110,000 copies printed, give or take, sold out so much. Pepper had to scramble to get me a writer's copy.
Yeah.
It took literally forever to get the writer's copy, which is how much you were sold out. Mary Campana told me she had the unfortunate thing about being like the only CS person at the office before we started closing the Friday after Thanksgiving, with everybody begging for the first issue of Beckett Football. Yeah, it is a great cover with Bo on it, by the way.
Good problem to have.
We talked about the growth of SCD. SCD was every other week in small pages, and by the end of the decade, it's 400 pages a week. Not even every other week. 89 is John, the guy who did the football card monthly price guide that ended up going away.
Yeah.
Then you had Mark Lewis with CPU that went away. And then you had Richie, and I cannot pronounce his last name.
Shavrock.
He went away in 1990. All of a sudden, what worked at the beginning of the decade, which was price guides on newsprint and really almost nothing written, became not just a price guide, but a full-fledged magazine.